If you have been on the internet this week, you heard the unfortunate news about Hayden Panettiere moving on to her eternal reward at the age of 36. What you may have also heard is that Hayden spoke about her decade-long partnership with the skincare brand Neutrogena coming to an end when she spontaneously spoke out about her own postpartum depression on a morning TV show. Not surprisingly, the internet is ablaze with people dumping out their Neutrogena products and swearing off the brand, with some predicting that it's simply over for Neutrogena because no crisis PR team could bring them back from firing a mother struggling with postpartum depression. You may be surprised to know that the church is sympathetic to both Hayden and Neutrogena on this topic, and I'll be telling you how so you can come to your own conclusions. I'm Desiree Cifuentes, and this is Uncatechized Catholic. Catholic social teaching, according to the USCCB, is a, quote, treasure of wisdom about building a just society and living lives of holiness amidst the challenges of modern society. Modern Catholic social teaching has been articulated through a tradition of papal, conciliar, and episcopal documents. The depth and richness of this tradition can be understood best through a direct reading of these documents, of which there are many, and while I won't be going into detail on each of those, I'll highlight a few key points found within them. Pertaining to Hayden Panettiere and Neutrogena, the importance of family, community, and participation comes to mind, as do the rights and responsibilities we have to society and our obligation to protect the vulnerable. There are more, but let's focus on these. Neutrogena failed Hayden on each of these fronts. Catholicism has been incredibly clear that families are the bedrock of our society, and they need to be protected and fostered. This is true when families are doing well, but it is especially true when they are struggling. Neutrogena allegedly tried to fire Hayden on the spot after her TV interview, according to Hayden herself in her interview with Jay Shetty, citing their morality clause. They kept her on only after it was pointed out to them that firing her for that reason was illegal. Neutrogena opted to keep Hayden on at that point, but when it came time to renew her contract, they simply did not do so, offering no explanation. Hayden filled in the blanks. Taking Hayden's account at face value, Neutrogena violated this principle of Catholic social teaching by viewing Hayden as something that could cause negative feelings toward their brand because she was such a well-known ambassador. They have not come out and said this themselves, but in that same Jay Shetty interview, Hayden pointed out that they watched everything, and they never invoked the morality clause when she was looking sloppy, partying, smoking, only when she mentioned how she could relate to her character on Nashville having postpartum depression. Pope Benedict XVI spoke to this in Caritas in Veritate, number 57, saying, quote, subsidiarity respects personal dignity by recognizing in the person a subject who is always capable of giving something to others. Let me pause here for a moment and defend Neutrogena. Hayden and I were pregnant with our first children at almost the exact same time. We even gave birth in the same place, Hawaii, I believe just a month apart. She and I were only 3 years apart in age, so I say all this to tell you I am keenly aware of what it was like to be coming into motherhood in your early 20s at that time. Although I can't relate to the famous element for her, I do know that 2014 was just the beginning of many maternal bubbles beginning to burst. The breastfeeding is taboo ideas were beginning to be challenged. Mothers were beginning to encourage other mothers to keep their babies close by baby wearing and bed sharing, and topics like postpartum depression were only just beginning to be taken more seriously and spoken about in a more mainstream manner. I can understand from a strictly business standpoint why Neutrogena would be afraid to dip their toes into that water. It wasn't trendy at that time to be pro-mental health. It wasn't desirable quite yet to be real and raw, as we were just on the tail ends of the celebrities are shiny perfect idols thing being the norm. The Catechism in paragraph 2478 says, quote, to avoid rash judgment, everyone should be careful to interpret insofar as possible his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. I think the most favorable understanding of Neutrogena's actions at the time is to acknowledge that the times were different 11 years ago and Neutrogena was acting in line with what was normal at the time. That said, that teaching in the Catechism comes from a quote from St. Ignatius of Loyola. He said, quote, to avoid rash judgment, everyone should be careful to interpret insofar as possible his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. Every good Christian ought to be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to another's statement than to condemn it. But if he cannot do so, let him ask how the other understands it. And if the latter understands it badly, let the former correct him with love. If that does not suffice, let the Christian try all suitable ways to bring the other to a correct interpretation so that he may be saved. In essence, assume the best, ask questions before you assume something negative, and labor to correct and move someone who is in error into a better understanding. While it may have been the norm at the time to shy away from those topics, it was wrong. And from a human standpoint, people at Neutrogena had to have known that on some level. They placed business above a person and norms above a family, to the detriment of a mother who clearly needed support and had been good to them for a decade. Reflecting back on Pope Benedict XVI's quote, Neutrogena could have seen this admission as an opportunity to be a trailblazing brand, seeing Hayden as the subject capable of giving something to others. They could still appeal to the fun youth with younger brand ambassadors and continue to embrace their aging millennial customer base by walking with them into motherhood. Hindsight is 2020, and I can only assume that if Neutrogena knew then what they know now, they would have seen things this way and kept Hayden on. Alas, they did not. But do they deserve to be canceled for it? Let's keep discussing. Catholic social teaching says we have responsibilities to society as individuals and institutions, as businesses and parties. You get it. Responsibility to society doesn't simply stop because business is business. Like, don't get me wrong, you have no obligation to burn down your empire in order to keep someone else warm, but there's almost always a middle ground between those two options that can be difficult to find, but we have a duty to navigate there nonetheless. Proverbs 31, 8-9 says, "Open your mouth to speak on behalf of those in need." Hayden did that, and Neutrogena frankly tried to silence it. As I said before, there was real opportunity for Neutrogena there, but they chose the easier to manage route of separating from Hayden instead. And this is not the Catholic way. We also have to protect the vulnerable, which Hayden clearly was. No matter how much fame and money she had, every new mother and person struggling with mental health is vulnerable. And Exodus 22, 20-26 says, quote, "You shall not oppress the poor or the vulnerable. God will hear their cry." It would be wrong to dismiss her struggles because of her net worth, and so I won't. Although I do acknowledge she had more access to help because of those resources. Much like this whole topic is shaping up to not be so black and white, this example of vulnerability and who it applies to is similarly nuanced. There's a long quote from Evangelii Gaudium that fits here, so buckle up for this read. Pope Francis said, quote, "God's word teaches that our brothers and sisters are the prolongation of the incarnation for each of us. As you did it to one of these, the least of my brethren, you did it to me." Matt 25:40. The way we treat others has a transcendent dimension. The measure you give will be the measure you get. Matt 7:2. It corresponds to the mercy which God has shown us. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. Luke 6:36-38. What these passages make clear is the absolute priority of going forth from ourselves toward our brothers and sisters as one of the two great commandments which ground every moral norm, and as the clearest sign for discerning spiritual growth in response to God's completely free gift. Twice the sentiment of the measure you give will be the measure you get was highlighted. While this is true and can rightfully be the framework we fall back on to enforce rules, boundaries, and consequences, it's always necessary that we act in charity and not vengefully, as St. Ignatius carefully articulated earlier. I say this to highlight that you may feel a sense of social justice by refusing to use Neutrogena now, but the spirit of justice always ought to be to bring people back around to what is good. Much like excommunication is not intended to be a punishment, but an eye-opener. Similarly, the excommunicated have a path back to communion with the church, and Neutrogena should have the opportunity to be forgiven if they atone. We have to remember that while Neutrogena is a brand, it employs real human beings who are similarly vulnerable if they lose their jobs because the entire business goes under. The people responsible for the decision to let Hayden go may not even work for Neutrogena anymore, and punishments inflicted on them now may only harm the innocent. If Neutrogena as a brand doesn't atone, the consequence is solely theirs. But if they do, and the public does not forgive, then the public shares in the blame for whatever may happen to the humans employed there. Ultimately, what Neutrogena did was shameful. Even if it is somewhat comprehensible, not justified, just something we can wrap our minds around when we consider how things were a little bit different back then. They didn't do the right thing then, but they have the opportunity to do the right thing now, and hopefully they do. What exactly the right path forward for them is, I don't know. I don't work in crisis PR. I do know that if they apply a Catholic understanding to their position now, they will be far better off than if they try to take the easier route again. At the end of the day, cancel culture isn't exactly Catholic social teaching as much as consequence culture and forgiveness culture are. Whether or not you boycott is up to you, although I will say if you have Neutrogena products, you already spent money on them. Being a good steward of your resources says it's fine to simply use them up and then find a new brand to replace them for the time being. For Uncatechized Catholic, I'm Desiree Cifuentes. I love you, I'm praying for you, and see you soon.